In the heart of the village of Kandeka, where dust clung to every footstep and whispers carried faster than the wind, there lived a woman named Nandela and her blind son, Kiboni. To the villagers, the boy was invisible. Worse, he was a curse. His father had abandoned him the day he was born, leaving Nandela to carry the heavy weight of hunger, mockery, and endless whispers alone. People shook their heads at her in the marketplace, calling her foolish for holding on to faith when, to them, there was nothing left to hope for. But what no one understood was that her faith was not weakness. It was the last rope she had to cling to, the last breath she could not afford to let go. And it was that very faith, as fragile as a thin flame trembling in the wind, that pushed her one morning to a door she had always feared. The door of the most mysterious man in the region, Makumba, the potter. They said his hands shaped more than clay, that his fingers whispered secrets, that his silence was heavier than words. Children were warned not to linger near his clay house at the bend in the road to the market. Adults pretended not to see him, but at night they repeated the stories, that he spoke with spirits, that pots shattered in his workshop and then healed. Themselves, that he sang in forgotten tongues when no one was listening. No one could ever tell if he was blessed or cursed, but everyone agreed he was not like other men. Nandela passed that clay house every day with a basin of clothes on her head. Every day, without fail, her eyes slid away. The oven outside was always burning, breathing out a strange smell, smoke mixed with roots and damp earth that made her heart tighten. It wasn't foul, but it wasn't comforting either. It was different, like a language she didn't know how to translate. And though she told herself she wasn't afraid, she always quickened her steps when the oven's heat reached her skin. But Kiboni, with senses sharper than sight, always noticed. He would tug her hand gently and say, "Mama, the potter's oven is lit again." His nose caught the smoke long before they turned the bend. She never answered, only squeezed his hand tighter. Until one day, the boy asked a question that pierced her like a spear through the chest. "Mama, what color is clay?" He had never asked her about the sun, the stars, or the shape of light. But clay, the very thing she had spent her life avoiding, fearing, scrubbing from other people's clothes. Clay was everywhere under her feet, yet nowhere in her heart. She froze in the middle of the path, the basin wobbling dangerously on her head. For a moment, she felt her throat close, her heart break in silence. But Nandela had a gift. She cried on the inside where no one could see. Slowly, with a trembling voice, she answered, "It's like the smell you feel when it rains. It's warm and cold at the same time. It's the color of roots." Kiboni smiled wide, like someone who had uncovered a secret treasure. That smile struck her deeper than any insult the villagers had ever thrown at her. For the first time, she wondered if clay wasn't just dirt after all. Maybe, just maybe, it carried something greater, something that could teach her son to see not with his eyes, but with his soul. And in that thought, fear began to loosen its grip. Because faith, she realized, begins exactly where fear ends. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the doorstep, her eyes fixed on the empty road as though waiting for life itself to come walking down. Kiboni slept peacefully, hands resting on his chest as if cradling a treasure only he could feel. And Nandela, staring into the shadows, whispered inside her heart, "Could it be that the very thing I've rejected all my life is the one thing that could give me back my son?" At dawn, before the mountains turned gold with sunlight, she made her choice. Wrapping her hair in a clean cloth and pulling on her dark blue tunic, she called gently, "Come, my son, let's take a walk." Kiboni didn't ask where. They both knew. He simply squeezed her hand, and in his smile, she felt both trust and a quiet knowing. When they reached the clay house, Nandela did not look away this time. The wooden gate was cracked and gray with age, the oven beside it breathing heat stronger than ever. It smelled as though the earth itself had awakened. Her heart pounded as she pushed the door, its creak splitting the silence like a warning bell. Inside, Makumba was seated on the floor, hands sunk deep in a basin of clay, kneading, breaking, reshaping. He did not look at her or the boy, but Nandela knew. He had been expecting them. The floor was coated in fine red dust that clung to their feet as they entered, as if the earth itself marked them for stepping into that space. Kiboni sniffed the air deeply. "Mama, this place smells like a spring." His words startled her. She felt as though her child's blind eyes were opening to a world she herself had refused to see. Makumba heard but did not speak. He only worked, his hands whispering in silence. At last, he stood, wiping his palms on a strip of cloth, and approached. Slowly, he stretched out his hands and touched Kiboni's face. His fingers were rough, cold and crumbling with dried clay. Yet the touch was gentle, like soil cradling a seed. Nandela's chest tightened. Her heart beat like a drum of the ancestors, but she did not pull away. For in that moment, fear seemed smaller than the silence that filled the room. Then, finally, Makumba spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper. Before he sees the world, he must feel where the world was born. The words cut through her like lightning. She thought of the stories from her childhood, how elders said the first man was shaped from wet earth. Was this madness or forgotten truth? Makumba dipped his fingers into a bowl of clay water, the smell of leaves and roots rising with the steam, and touched the boy's eyes again. Kiboni shivered. "It's cold, but it's alive," he murmured. Makumba said nothing more. He returned to his basin and began shaping clay as though nothing unusual had happened. Nandela's knees weakened. She wanted to thank him, to ask what it meant, but deep down she knew this was not a place for words. Only the heart could speak here. So she simply nodded, took her son's hand, and stepped out into the sunlight. As they walked home, Kiboni broke the silence. "Mama." His voice carried a weight beyond his years, his blind face serene like an old man holding time in his palms. That night, Nandela did not light the fire. She sat in the dark, watching the shadows dance on the mud wall. Kiboni had gone to bed early, but before he drifted to sleep, he traced his fingers over his own eyes, repeating the potter's gesture as if engraving a sacred ritual onto himself. The air outside carried a warmer wind, and in her chest, Nandela felt something she had not tasted in many years. It was not yet sight, not yet a miracle, but it was hope. And for a woman who had been trampled like earth all her life, hope was like the first rain after a long drought. It did not shout. It seeped in quietly, gently, steadily. The next days looked the same on the surface. Dirty clothes still piled up, clay still stuck to their heels, and silence still hung in the house. But everything had shifted. There was a new way in the boy's breathing, a new strength in the way she walked. They carried a secret now, one too precious to name. But while hope filled their home, the world outside was not kind. Neighbors began to whisper, their voices sharp with laughter. Mata, the woman across the yard, sneered while sweeping. "She's gone to that clay man. Mark my words, he'll blind her boy's spirit, not heal it." Old Kaboon, sitting under his cashew tree, shook his head. "Faith like that, it breaks people. That woman will lose her mind." Nandela heard every word. She didn't answer, didn't fight back. She just scrubbed the dishes harder, sometimes breaking them in her hands. At night, she cried inside where no one could see. But still, she kept going. Because when you have a sick child, You learn to hold the world together with your teeth if you must. One evening, returning from the river, she found a mark of clay drawn on her door, a closed eye. Was it a warning, a curse, or just cruelty? Kiboni touched it gently, his fingers calm. "Whoever made this is more afraid than I am," he said softly. She smiled inside but said nothing, only wiped the mark away with a wet cloth. After that, even the children began avoiding Kiboni. Once, they would let him sit with them to hear stories or laugh at their mischief, play with pebbles. Now they called him Clay Child Cursed Closed Eye. Some mothers forbade their kids from going to his house, said that place was tainted now that the potter was not a man of God, that he had meddled with forces that shouldn't be touched. The burden Andela carried grew heavier, not for herself. She was already hardened, but for Kib, who now had to endure the loneliness that comes from cruelty. And even so, the boy didn't complain, didn't grumble. He still woke up early, smelled the wind, counted the footprints of birds on the ground. It was as if he saw more than the others, precisely because he didn't see like the others. One night she heard him singing softly, a melody she didn't recognize. It was a song with no words, only sound. It sounded like an ancient prayer, the kind grandmothers used to make in secret. Hands over the chest, eyes lost in the darkness. Mandela stood in the doorway, listening in silence. She cried now like someone breaking down. She cried like someone watering a root that still doesn't know if it will bloom. The next morning, she went to the market to buy roots. As she passed by two women selling gourds, she heard one of them say, "If clay could heal, there wouldn't be blind people in poor villages." The other laughed and replied, "She clings to superstition 'cause she's got nothing left." Nandela stopped, not out of anger, but sadness. She looked at the two with calm and said, "Sometimes what you call superstition is just a mother's last hope," and walked away, leaving the two staring at the ground. At home, when she told Kib, he held her hand and said, "If they could see what I dream, maybe they'd stop laughing." She didn't understand. "What do you dream, my son?" he answered, eyes closed but soul wide open. "Light. So much light. Like the sun is inside me trying to come out." Nandela hugged her son tightly. She said nothing. But in that silent embrace, she understood. Their faith didn't need the Ville's approval, because while they mocked the clay, the boy was already feeling the sun from within. And whoever feels light, even in darkness, has already begun to see, even if the others don't know it yet. The nights in Kanda had always been too dark. When the moon hid, not even the roosters knew the right time to crow. The village would plunge into a thick silence, broken only by restless dogs and the dry rustle of leaves dancing in the wind. But that week, something changed in Nandela's house. A different kind of brightness seemed to dwell there. It wasn't electric light, nor the flame of a lamp. It was a presence, a vibration, as if darkness had lost its power in that corner of the world. Kibni began waking up with a sweaty face and a quiet smile. In the first few days, he said nothing. He would just sit on the mat, run his hands over his eyes, and breathe deeply like someone returning from a distant place. Nandela watched him. A mother knows when something shifts in her child's spirit. On the fourth night in Arrow, he spoke, his voice soft, as if afraid to spoil the mystery. "Mama, I dreamed of light." She froze. She was sifting flour, but her hands stopped mid-air. "Light?" she asked in a thin voice. Kibini nodded. It was like the sun came inside me. I could see everything. Not with my eyes, but I could see. The colors were dancing. Mama, the red of guava, the green of leaves, the blue of the wet sky, and everything spun round me like it was recognizing me. Nandela felt her chest tighten. It was fear and hope mixed together like muddy water. After a flood, She was afraid of feeding her son's illusion, but she also couldn't smother the flame that had come to life so brightly inside him. It was like walking on shards and knowing you still had to keep going. She knelt down, took his hands in hers, and said, "If it's a dream, may it keep coming, because even a dream can teach us how to see." From that day on, Kibini changed. His steps grew more confident. He no longer hesitated to climb the slope. That led to the backyard. He learned to count these steps with his feet, to tell morning from afternoon by the sound of the chicken coop. There was a kind of light in his movements, something new, invisible but undeniable, and the village began to notice. One morning, Ash walked alone to the well with his bamboo walking stick. A woman commented, "That boy walks like someone who sees." Another replied, "Or like someone who has faith." Old Kaboon, who used to mock, began to watch him with less sarcasm. He said nothing, just observed like someone trying to understand what escapes the eye dot. As for Nandela, her heart felt lighter. She still washed clothes, still heard the whispers, still endured the crooked glances. But now, at the end of the day, she sat with Kib on the porch and listened to his dreams, as if listening to sacred stories. He spoke of singing lights, of trees that glowed, of paths opening within the darkness, and sometimes he'd say something that gave her chills. "Mama, I think I'm starting to remember your face, even though I've never seen it." One afternoon, in a gentle drizzle, while hanging clothes on a makeshift clothesline, saw Kib standing in the middle of the yard, face lifted, arms wide open, the water ran down his face, and he was smiling. "It's all clear inside me." "Mama," he shouted. She ran to him, gently pulled him close, wiped his face with the edge of her skirt, and asked, "What did you see, my son?" He replied, "I didn't see, I felt, but now I know what light is." That moment was etched into her like fire on wood, because it was the first time her son spoke of something that didn't come from pain, but from discovery. And in that instant, Nandela understood that perhaps healing wouldn't come like in the books or in the tales of healers. Perhaps healing was coming from the inside out, like a seed sprouting in silence before breaking through the soil. That night, she didn't pray asking for sight. She prayed giving thanks for the dreams, because sometimes what God gives first isn't the answer. It's the courage to keep asking. And Kiboni, with his dreams of light, was showing his mother a new way to see even in the dark. Time in Kanda wasn't measured by clocks, but by the cycles of the earth, the silences between harvests and the scent of the wind. That's how Nandela knew. The moment had come. She couldn't explain why, but something inside her. Baby. The heart, or something even older, made her feel it was time to return to the potter's house. That morning, she spoke to Noon. She simply woke early, combed his hair, with firm fingers dressed him in the best tunic they had, and took him down the dirt road. It wasn't market day, nor a holiday, nor Sunday service. But within them, there was something solemn, as if they were going to a meeting arranged by fate before they were even born. Makumba received them without looking up. He was in the same place, hands sunk into the clay as if he'd never left. Smoke from the oven rose in spirals, and the sound of his bare feet pressing the wet earth was like a muffled drumbeat. Without saying a word, he took a handful of fresh clay, threw it onto the spinning wooden wheel, and began to shape it. Kipin listened to every sound attentively. The slap of the clay, the wheel turning, the splash of water, the potter's soft breaths. Between movements, it was like a silent dance, a liturgy of the earth. Landella stood beside her son, arms crossed like someone guarding a secret. Macumber, eyes lowered, shaped a pot, not large, not small, but firm and round with soft curves like a mother's womb. As soon Ash finished, the potter held the vessel in both hands, raised it to eye level, and without hesitation let it fall to the ground. The sound of the clay breaking echoed like a muffled thunder. Nandela stepped forward, startled. Kibini simply murmured. He broke it on purpose. Macumber then spoke. His voice was low but firm. Only those who accept being broken can be reshaped with new vision. It wasn't an explanation. It was a sentence, a raw truth. Life had already broken Nandela into many pieces, and now maybe it was time for the son to be broken too, not in body, but in spirit. And then the ritual began. Macumberin knelt before Kibni. He took another handful of fresh clay, kneaded it in his palms like someone preparing an ancient remedy, and mixed it with a plant that had a strong scent, bitter, alive, known by few, the kind of plant only the oldest healers still gathered, and only under twilight light. Then he blew over the mixture and murmured words that belonged to no known dialect. They were deep ancestral sounds, sounds from a time when the world was still fresh clay. With his fingers covered in the mixture, Macumba touched Kibni's eyes slowly, like someone sealing a pact. The boy shivered, not out of fear, but recognition. It was as if that touch awakened memories that weren't his, but now lived in his flesh. Then the potter began to sing a horse song in the rhythm of a fire circle, in a melody that sounded like both lament and promise. Nandela fell to her knees, not out of weakness, but reverence. Her hands covered her face, and her body trembled. She didn't understand what she was seeing, but she felt it. And that was enough. This was not just any moment. It was a spiritual birth, a crossing, a passage. When the song ended, Macumba took a shard of the broken pot and placed it in Kibi's hands. Hold it. What is broken can also hold light. The boy pressed the piece of clay to his chest, and then, without another word, the potter returned to his wheel and began shaping another vessel. As if everything that had just happened was merely a brief pause in his eternity of clay dot. As they left, Nandela didn't look back, but Kib did. Even without seeing, he stopped at the doorway and said, "He has light in his hands, Mama, I felt it," and walked on with steady steps like someone now carrying something inside that no one could take away. That night before bed, he placed the clay shard beside his mat and murmured, "It's warm, Mama. Feels like there's fire inside," and fell asleep in peace. Nandela sat nearby, watching her son sleep, and she knew that something had been planted, not in the eyes, but in the soul, and that sooner or later it would bloom, because the potter's clay never returns empty. The news of the second encounter between Kib and the potter spread through the village like fire on dry straw. No one knew exactly what had happened, but all it took was a spark of curiosity to ignite the rumors. They said the clay man had performed a strange ritual, that he had sung in the tongues of the dead, that he had mixed herbs with sorcery and touched the boy's eyes like a healer from some forgotten forest. Some even said the pot he shattered had a spirit inside. The kite words took on different shapes in every mouth, but they all carried the same flavor: suspicion. In the village, faith and fear lived side by side, and when something new was born, something that couldn't be explained with known prayers or familiar blessings, weary eyes lit up faster than oil lamps on a dark night. Some saw Macumba as a man touched by ancient forces, others as a heretic disguised as a craftsman. But everyone talked, and they talked with more fury than wisdom. The pastor of the small clay chapel, Mama Eel, was one of the first to speak. In her sweet but firm voice, she said, caution was necessary. Not all power comes from heaven. Sometimes, the enemy knows how to shape clay, too. She said this to a circle of women during morning prayer, and those words fell like seeds in thirsty soil. They grew quickly. They echoed. Some began to avoid Nandella's house. Old customers stopped sending. Their clothes. Children who once played along the path now crossed to the other side of the road. Even the neighbors' roosters seemed to crow from farther away. The loneliness, which had long been a frequent visitor, became a permanent guest. But Nandella did not bend. She kept her routine with dignity, washed clothes even without guaranteed payment, made her son's porridge with thin flour, and kept the small altar of cloth and stones lit with candle and prayer. But the hardest part wasn't the abandonment. It was the look of doubt coming from those who once offered her a hand. Even old Aunt Melita, who helped bring Kiboni into the world, came to visit, only to ask in a hushed voice, "Are you sure that Potter isn't meddling with things he shouldn't?" Nandella, her eyes weary, simply replied, "I don't know what he's meddling with, but my son is dreaming of light, and I've never seen poison do that." Inside the house, Kib seemed untouched by it all. He kept talking about the dreams. Sometimes he sang the Potter's melodies even without remembering learning them. Other times he lay on the earth and floor for hours, holding the piece of the broken pot, murmuring words of gratitude. "Mama, the earth speaks when we listen in silence," he would say, and there was something in his voice that gave people chills. Not of fear, but of something sacred that touches without warning. But not everyone saw it that way. Some said the boy was being taken, that the broken pot held more than clay, that a cleansing was needed, a strong prayer, maybe even an exorcism. One woman suggested taking the boy to the fire temple on the neighboring hill. Another spoke of bringing a pastor from another village, one known for undoing cursed blind eyes. The tension was growing. The village no longer knew whether it feared the miracle or its failure. And on that tightrope, sharp tongues cut deeper than knives. Nandella heard every comment like thorns in her feet. But she kept walking, not out of bravery, but necessity. Because a mother who stops halfway risks losing her child in the dark. She began sleeping beside Kiban every night. Not out of fear. He would leave, but from the need to be close. She slept, with her hand on his chest, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat. Sometimes he would wake suddenly, eyes wide open, saying, "Mama, there's light under my skin. I can feel it." She would just hold him and drift back to sleep, even as fear made its home in her bones. One early morning, they heard footsteps near the window. It wasn't an animal nor the wind. They were human steps, slowly fading away. Nandella didn't light the lamp. She remained silent, just listening to her son's breathing. She knew what was at stake now was more than the boy's vision. It was the Ville's belief. And faith, when threatened, can turn into stone or flower. It depends on where it lands. And there, in that clay house, something was blooming even in silence, something the village eyes still couldn't see. But Kibanese they were starting to, even if only in the dark. It was an afternoon like so many others. In Decca, the sky stained with dust and heat painted everything in orange and silence. Chickens pecked lazily near the papaya trees, and the warm wind dragged leaves and promises across the yard. Nand was washing the last basin of clothes in an improvised wash tank made of old tins when she heard Kibi's voice coming from the backyard. It wasn't a shout nor a call. It was a broken sentence, as if even he doubted what he was saying. "Mama, I think I saw your shadow." She froze. Water slipped between her fingers, carrying away soap and dust. But everything inside her went still. Her heart beat so hard it hurt. She stood motionless, like someone waiting for either a miracle to be confirmed or a hallucination to begin. She turned slowly, her wet hands still dripping, and saw Kib standing. Near the doorway, his face turned toward the light streaming through the slats in the window. "What did you see, my son?" she asked, trying to hide the tremble in her voice. He furrowed his brow like someone searching for certainty in the dark. I didn't know. It was like a shape, a darker mark on the ground, and it moved when you moved. Then, he lowered his head, as if he had said something forbidden. Nandela dropped to her knees, not out of hysteria nor despair, but something stronger. Recognition. In that moment, she recognized an answer she had never dared to ask for out loud. She whispered through trembling lips, "If this is a dream, may I never wake up?" Kib ran to her, startled. "Did I say something wrong, Mama?" She hugged him tightly with her clothes still wet, eyes full and face warm. "No, my son, you said everything right that afternoon." She didn't finish the laundry. She left the basin there with soap and dirty clothes. She knelt beside her son and held him close like someone gripping the root of a tree that had almost been uprooted. She wept softly, the kind of crying that washes more than river water ever could. At dusk, Maka appeared at the gate. He didn't knock. He didn't call. He simply stood there, hand resting on the bamboo fence. Nandela saw him from afar. She got up, wiped her face with her apron, and walked to him. She didn't say anything. Neither. Did he? They just looked at each other, and he nodded. A simple gesture, but one that said much. It said, "It's beginning." It said, "The clay has answered." It said, "The invisible is becoming visible." And then he walked away unhurried, like someone who had already fulfilled what was needed. That night, Kib asked to sleep with the window open. "I want to hear the world better. Mama, I want to feel the whole night." She didn't question him. She simply moved his mat closer to the window slat and sat beside him, holding his hand. At some point, half asleep, he said, "The shadow was just the beginning, right?" She didn't answer, but deep in her soul, she knew yes. The following days were marked by small revelations. Kib began to notice more visual presences. He said he saw brightness where sunlight hit, pale spots on the hanging cloths, shapes passing quickly near the door. Little by little, the colors from his dreams began to have names. "What's red, Mama?" he would ask, and she'd respond with comparisons she created in the moment, inventing ways to explain the invisible. "It's the color of ripe guava. It's as warm as a hug when you're crying." He would listen, smile, and say, "Then I've already felt red." The village, on the other hand, still looked on with suspicion. Some said it was a lie. Others claimed the boy was only imagining things. One Ortwo neighbors began to avoid Nandela's doorway even more deliberately, but there were also those who began to go quiet. Those who saw the boy walking alone to the chicken coop and said nothing. Those who noticed the certainty in his steps and thought, even if only silently, what if it's true, in soul? There were no more doubts she didn't need the village to believe, because she saw the miracle blooming day by day like a seed watered with patience and pain. And even if full dawn hadn't yet arrived, the night was already bright enough for her to go on the shadow. Her son had seen that dark shape on the ground was more than light and body, it was a sign. And for someone who had spent a lifetime groping through the dark, a shadow is the beginning of sight. That morning, Kandak awoke as it always did, with roosters crowing out of sync, brooms sweeping dust from the yards, and the smell of warm porridge slipping through the cracks of the clay houses. But something was different in the air. A quiet unease like when the sky hints at rain, but the clouds still pretend innocence. Mandela felt it in her body, a kind of trembling that wasn't fear. It was a warning. Kiboni woke before the sun rose. He sat up on the mat, rubbed his eyes as he did every day, but this time he didn't need to feel his way to the door. He stood, with confidence guided by something even he couldn't explain. Nandela, already on her feet, turned to call him and froze. The boy was walking on his own, looking toward the light, not with the empty eyes of before, but with his face gently lifted like someone searching for something in the air. "Mama, your clothes are red like ripe guava." The sentence dropped to the floor like a silent bolt of lightning. For a moment, Nandela thought she had misheard. "What?" she asked, her voice caught in her throat. Kib smiled, a wide smile full of certainty. "Red, Mama, I remember you said." Red was warm like a hug, and now I see it. It's just like the guava we picked that summer. Remember? Anne fell to her knees. The ground seemed to vanish beneath her. Her hands trembled, her lips searched for words, and her heart pounded like a war drum. Her son could see her, really see her. His eyes were no longer cloudy. There was light in them, a timid light, but alive. He blinked, squinted, made faces like someone learning how to see for the first time. She cried as she never had before, not with screams, but with small, deep sobs that came from the soul. She hugged him, touched his face, repeated, "You see me, my son, you see me." And he, with the calm of someone who had always known her face from the inside, replied, "Now I see you on the outside, but I already knew what you looked like on the inside." The village noticed quickly. First, it was a child who saw Kib walking, without a cane. Then, an old man swore he'd seen him stop to admire a yellow butterfly. Soon, a shocked neighbor claimed to have heard the boy describe the colors in the school garden. The news spread like wildfire. The blind boy can see now. The washerwoman's son has seen the light. The boy of the clay has opened his eyes. And each mouth made the miracle grow, mixing faith with wonder. Some didn't believe. They said it was all an act. Others went silent, overtaken by an ancient fear, as if they had mocked the wrong kind of faith, and now stood before a truth they could no longer deny. And then came the whispers about Macumba. Was he a man or a spirit? Was it a miracle or sorcery? Is he still in the village? But no one could find the potter. His house was empty, the oven cold, his clay tools covered in dust. Some claimed to have seen him leave before dawn, barefoot with a straw sack on his back. Others swore he never truly existed, that he was a messenger, an ancestor who took form for a time. But there in the corner of the yard, atop a stone, sat a fragment of the broken pot, and on it written in charcoal were the words, "The earth heals if the heart does not harden." The phrase became a whisper among the women, a proverb. In the mouths of the elders, a prayer for the mothers washing clothes at the river. Remembering Nandela, she no longer had to explain. She walked the village streets with her head held high, not out of pride, but gratitude. The same ones who once mocked her now lowered their eyes when she passed. Some came with quiet apologies, bringing cassava or bits of cloth as offerings. Others simply stayed silent, honoring the quiet of one who had lived a miracle. But the most remarkable thing was Kibini, not just because he could see, but because of how he saw. He looked at the world with a tenderness few possessed. He lingered in the details, stopped to watch birds in flight, the shadows of trees, the shapes of clouds. He said the world was more beautiful than he'd imagined, but that he still preferred to listen with his heart. And so Kandaka was forced to swallow its pride, because what had once been a source of ridicule, a blind boy, the son of a poor woman, had become a symbol of something greater, and even the hardest hearts had to admit the impossible now walked, among them with eyes wide open. Macumba's house stood at the bend in the road, exactly where the ground began to crack from thirst, and the vegetation lost its green. For years it had gone unnoticed by almost everyone. A thick clay shack with an ever-burning oven, the scent of damp earth in the air, and a strange peace that unsettled those who didn't understand silence. But now, after Kibi's healing, the Ville's eyes turned toward it, like people searching for answers in the direction of mystery, and what they found was emptiness. Macumba had vanished. No letter, no warning, no witness. The door left ajar, the oven cold, the clay-stained bowls dry, and the mats moldy. As if no one had stepped there in weeks, even though several villagers claimed to have seen him. Just the day before, Nandela was one of the first to go there, not out of curiosity, but from a gratitude that ached in her chest. She wanted to say thank you, to speak through her son's now open eyes the words her heart had carried in silence. But when she passed through the bamboo gate, she knew instantly he was no longer there. The cold oven looked like a sealed mouth. The still clay wheel, like a heart no longer beating, and on the floor beside the bench where the potter once shaped his vessels. There was only a piece of charcoal and shards of the broken pot from the day of the ritual. Nandela knelt, picked up one of the fragments, and read the sentence written with the force of someone who writes in time, not just in clay. The earth heals if the heart does not harden. She read it in silence, then aloud she repeated it 3 times like someone learning a new prayer. And then she cried, not a cry of loss nor of longing, but a cry of understanding. Because Macumba hadn't left. He had fulfilled. He was like seasonal rain arriving uninvited, transforming the land, making the dead bloom and then departing, leaving flowers instead of footprints. The village reacted in divided ways. Some said he had fled, scared of the attention. Others claimed he was an ancestral spirit sent by an old enchantment. Some even said he never existed, that he was a tale spun by the woman and the boy to fool the people. But no one could deny what their eyes saw. Kiboni could see Dot now. Every part of the village carried an unspoken question. Who was the potter? To many just a strange craftsman, to others a mysterious healer. But to Nandela, he was the breath. God used to rewrite her son's story, and that was enough. In the days that followed, Macumba's house became a quiet place of pilgrimage. Women left healing leaves at the door. Children placed smooth stones and dried flowers on the doorstep. An elder planted a young medicinal tree beside the oven, and Nandela from time to time went there just to sit on the floor in silence. She said she could feel his presence in the clay, in the wind, in the way the birds flew in circles over the roof. Doane, for his part, never asked about him. When his mother mentioned that Macumba had gone, the boy simply said he already knew. He wouldn't stay. Then he held the shard of the pot he always kept beside his mat and said, "He taught me to see with my eyes, but the most important thing was that he taught me to touch with my heart, and he truly did touch more and more. He touched objects, plants, animals, and people. They came to see him, not out of curiosity, but for something deeper. They came to hear his words, watch his movements, and let him hold their hands for a few seconds. There was something in Kibi's touch that brought comfort. They said it was like time paused for a moment and the world fit back inside the chess. Nandela never boasted, never sought importance. She still washed clothes, cooked thin beans, and gave silent thanks for each morning. But inside she carried what no mother wants to carry alone, the testimony of a miracle. And even without an audience, without an altar, without a choir, she lived that miracle with the dignity of someone who knows the clay of life. Because she knew Macumba hadn't disappeared. He had simply returned to where he came from, the earth. And in the earth, those who have faith never vanish. They dissolve and remain. After Macumba's departure and the awe that spread through Candia like a fog of silence, Kiboni and Nandela's life took another path. It did not return to what it had been. It couldn't. It was like trying to plant seeds in soil that had already borne fruit. The land changes after it gives life. The boy who once walked blindly, guided only by his mother's firm hand, now walked with steps of his own, led by a light that came not only from his eyes, but from his soul. Yes, Kibini could see. He recognized colors, shapes, movement. But what drew the most attention wasn't what he saw, it was what he touched. With the same hands that once trembled, used to searching for walls and furniture edges, he now touched people. He touched to heal, To listen through the skin, turned calm to those who had already forgotten the name of hope. It began with little Lulu, the daughter of a woman who washed pots to survive. The girl had an illness in her eyes that made her walk with her head always down, avoiding the sun. When she heard about Kibini, her mother brought Lulu to Nandola's house, not asking much, not demanding anything. She only said, "If he can hold her hand, that's enough." And Kib held her hand. He sat silently for a few minutes, then said to the girl, "You don't need to hide from the light. It's already inside you." And Lulu smiled for the first time in days. Dot. From that day on, more children came, more mothers. People who once turned their faces in the street now knocked on the door with humility. Some wanted Kib to pray, others to tell how he was healed. And he did both without pomp, without spectacle. He'd sit with the visitor on the clay bench by the porch, hold their hand and say, "You don't need to see like others do. You just need to feel what others forget." He didn't promise cures. He didn't give answers. But something in his presence calmed the desperate, and the village, which once mocked, now came to seek comfort at the bare feet of the boy of clay. Nandela watched everything with the eyes of someone who knows the cost of a miracle. She never introduced herself as the mother of the boy who sees, but everyone knew who she was. Even the women who once looked down on her now brought her flour, cloth, small gifts. She accepted them with a simple nod, without pride, without revenge. Because those who've been wounded by injustice don't need trophies. They need peace. One day, while walking with Kiboni to the river, he stopped suddenly, bent down, and picked up a dry leaf. He showed it to his mother and said, "The veins on this leaf are like the paths we walk." "Mama, some seem crooked, but they all lead to the root." Nandela smiled. The sun, who once saw only shadows, now saw lessons even in what the wind left behind. He began visiting other villages, not as a prophet nor a preacher. He went as a guest, as someone who had been healed and now simply wanted to share the light he carried. He helped children understand their bodies, taught adults to listen to silence, and sometimes he just sat in the village square and told stories. But his stories had a different taste. They were made of clay, of shadow, of pain, and of faith. Dot. So the boy who once felt walls with fear now touched souls with tenderness. He said the greatest darkness wasn't in closed eyes. It was in hardened hearts, and that if the heart softened like clay in the right hands, anything could be remade, shaped, healed. His mission wasn't born with fanfare. It didn't come with songs or crowds. It came with silence, with small gestures, with the warmth of hands that had once known the absence of light. And so Kibini became a beacon for many, without needing to shine brighter than anyone, but lighting others from within as they crossed his path. And Nandela, she remained the same woman who washed clothes and lit fires with damp wood. But now, as she walked through the village, children called her mother of the miracle, and she didn't correct them. She just smiled and kept walking because she knew that miracle wasn't made of blinding light or power that dominates. It was made of clay, patience, and love. The same clay she once avoided and which now lived inside her son as a new way of seeing the world. Now when dust rises on the roads of Kanda and the sun sets behind the reddish clay hills, there is always someone telling the story of the woman who raised a blind son and saw that son learn to see the world from the inside out. It's no longer just a tale whispered in markets or sewing circles. It has become a living legend, a memory that burns and comforts at the same time. Nandela, once invisible to so many, is now spoken of with reverence. The mother of the miracle, they say, but she wears no crown of glory. She still kneads bread dough with the same cracked hands from washing clothes, still kneels by the fire to blow on damp wood, still walks barefoot with the steady rhythm of someone who knows the ground she walks. The difference lies in how the village looks at her now, in the respectful silence that forms when she passes, in the care with which they say her name, in the way they listen to her words, even if they are few. Kibaini, in turn, never became a spectacle. He didn't seek stages or fame. He became a beacon, not the kind that shouts light, but the kind that shines quietly. He still listens more than he speaks, still touches more than he points. He says he learned in the darkness that the world is made more of soul than of color. And when someone asks what he sees when he closes his eyes, he replies, "I see what many lose when they open theirs too much." The village, once blind with prejudice, now sees. It sees that clay can be a blessing, that silence can heal, that the unlikely can be a path. And more than anything, it is learned. Faith is not explained. It is lived. And that Nandela taught with her life, without raising her voice, without revenge, for the laughter she once endured. As for the potter, no one has seen him again. Some still walk to his old house like visiting a grave that never had a body. Others swear he was sent by the ancestors, or even by God, on a mission with a beginning and an end. But most have come to understand Makumba was clay that rose, shaped other clay, and then returned to the earth. Like all things that are essential in the back of Nandela's house, the shard from the ritual pot is still kept. That same one on a simple shelf beside a candle that never goes out, rests the fragment bearing the handwritten phrase, "The earth heals if the heart does not harden." Sometimes when life weighs heavy on her shoulders, she sits there in front of that piece of clay and repeats the phrase like watering a hidden flower. And her heart softens again because what remained was not just a boy's recovered sight. What remained was the certainty that love which creates even in darkness, that touches without seeing, that persists without proof, is the greatest form of faith there is. And when someone asks Nandela if all of it was really real, she smiles gently and answers, "Real weighs the love that never needed to see in order to keep creating." And that phrase echoes in every home, in every mother, in every heart that has ever felt rejected, forgotten, or unseen. Because in the end, the story of Nandela and Kibis, not just about vision, it's about what we begin to see when we stop looking only with our eyes. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our